Doctor.
Hello, Nancy. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you?
Fine, thank you. Just as good afternoon.
Good afternoon, doctor.
Good afternoon, doctor.
Nancy, how is UP?
He's fine. So much better than our home country.
You've now settled, eh?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. That is great, eh?
Yeah.
Are you enjoying the heat, eh? Today is a bit hot, eh?
Yeah.
Sam, how are you? Geoffrey Musa?
Doctor, I'm okay. How are you, doctor?
Fine, thanks. Are you also in South Africa or?
Now I'm in Kampala, Uganda.
Ah, you guys didn't travel, eh?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. What about Musa?
Dr. Moke, I'm in Kampala, Uganda.
And Geoffrey is also in Kampala.
No, doctor. I'm at UP.
Oh, okay. That is nice. You are enjoying the environment, eh?
Not enjoying, but I'm trying to fit in because the weather is taking me badly. Today it is
Today,
cold.
apparently, it's very hot, eh? Today, eh?
Exactly.
And when you arrived the following day, it was a bit cold, eh?
Just that's actually I almost moved out with a blanket to go for orientation.
Yes, it's good to experience such changes so that you appreciate certain things. You know, sometimes you take the weather, you know, for granted. Eh? Hanko, how are you?
Hi, doctor. I'm doing all right. Thanks, and yourself.
I'm well, eh?
Sorry for
It's
being a
very
few
hot
minutes
today,
late.
eh?
Yo, doctor, it is very hot, even for us who are from here. It is very, very, very hot. I must say the heat is catching all of us off guard.
I'm almost getting a flu, eh?
Oh, yo.
Today is serious, eh?
Yeah, but especially now with going in and out of the lecture venues, a lot of people are also falling ill because obviously in the venues there is like aircon, and then the moment you go outside, you get hit by this heat wave.
Yeah, so it's challenging anyway, but we are happy, eh?
Yeah, no, I must say after a very cold season, it's very nice that we have this heat because it's going to encourage the rain, which we so desperately need.
So soon it will begin, raining, eh?
Yeah, hopefully, doctor.
Sorry, yesterday we couldn't meet. I was aware that there was an orientation taking place, so I was informed by the Eva and the group that I postponed the classes to today because in the morning they were finishing up with the orientation. So that's why we couldn't meet yesterday.
Doctor. Hello?
Yes, Sam.
Doctor, just before you dive into today's agenda, I have some questions.
Yes.
Regarding the last three documents we addressed in the previous lecture. The continent document was clear, and the one regarding cooperatives was a bit okay, but there's a complex one regarding food supply chain coordination.
Yes, that one I also noticed it was a bit complex for you guys, eh?
So there are about two questions that I have arising from that document. At the start, before we got there, we talked about supply chains. And I think it was under governance, whereby we have supply chains that are demand-driven, supply-driven.
And the different types of, chains, eh?
Yes.
And actors.
Exactly. So you find that some are buyers have more bargaining power, or they have the dominant power over the suppliers. and you realize you have more influence or even power or control over the standards of what you're supplying them. So when I got to this document, it simply talked about supply chains which are driven by large retailers, and the distinguishing features. Talks about also the global processing companies and how economies, the bargaining power, this system still rotates around the whole issue. So my question is about, is there a big distinction between governance and coordination? Because I don't see in this document where they talk about anything like maybe the coordination controls, like the ex ante and the ex ante and the post control processes. Not anywhere are talked about in this document regarding
in the document,
regarding all the different supply chain varieties listed. So is there a big difference between governance and coordination? Or like somehow Deloitte just combines it all together? That's quite the same.
So you want to understand whether there's a difference between coordination
and governance.
Coordination and governance.
These are two documents clearly point it out well, but when you rely on this literature, it's kind of not clear. It's not even talked about in there. That maybe these are the ex ante controls, maybe there's a contract here, maybe the post ante here, you're free not to repeat a transaction with the same kind of password. Nothing is indicated.
So when we talk about the governance, of course, we are interested in the institutional frameworks that guides the transactions within the chain. Because when you talk about governance, there's also power coming in. Now, who controls those activities, the transactions? Who has got the power even to make decisions? What are some of the governance, the frameworks that guides people as they undertake different activities within the chain? So when we are talking about coordination, there are so many activities within the chain. And to ensure that everything is synchronized and the flow of information is appropriate, the flow of goods is appropriate, it means that there is need for communication to the different parties. They need to get the right information. They need to coordinate those activities to ensure that the activities are done timely and in the right manner. And at the end of the day, as the consumer gets these products, is satisfied. So when you're coordinating, it's more of focusing on the different activities that takes place at the different nodes of the chain. So, but then with the governance, we are looking at those frameworks, the institutional frameworks that can enable people to undertake transactions, because they are more focused on the transactional aspects of the relationship within the supply chain. Are you getting it? So
yes,
if you look at this article, basically they were just trying to explain the different relationships. For instance, a relationship between the large retailers and other chain actors, and how the supply chain varies across these different actors within the chain. So there is a big difference between coordination. Coordination is just managing these activities, the information, the products and so on and so forth. But when you talk about governance now, you need some frameworks, institutional frameworks that can guide these actors as they engage in various transactions.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question is about hybrid institutions and how they relate to the market and farms, and maybe their role in supply chain coordination.
Hello, can you just be loud enough?
I was asking hybrid institutions, how the question is about hybrid institutions and how they relate to the market and farms. And maybe how their role in supply chain coordination. Like, can you really bring it out to maybe a real life example in one program?
Okay, we know that for hybrid, of course, it comprises of different now functions. This is an organization or institution that can manage different functions or perform different functions as they try to, link up with the various markets. So being that they can perform a number of functions, they are able then to relate with different markets, depending on the nature of course, demands or products that are demanded by these, markets. But then I don't have an example as at now, an ideal example that maybe can illustrate on this. Maybe anybody who can think of an example? Any person who has an example, an ideal example? Hello? From the case study, is making reference to the case study on food supply chains, coordination, governance, and other shaping forces. So the question is that how does the hybrid, institutions relate, the markets? I think, Sam, maybe I'll get back to you on this one later in the next.
Okay.
When I think of an ideal example.
Thank you.
Yes, but we find that for these particular institutions, they do more than what a particular market can handle or can do, or an institution or individual. So they perform a number of functions at the end of the day. So I think we can begin today's lesson. So sorry, I informed you that the sixth lesson will be tackled by an invited guest. So he is yet to confirm an ideal day. So in that case, I request that we move on to the next lesson or topic, that is cross-border trade. So let me just share the PowerPoint presentation. Good, so I think from the previous lessons, you are now comfortable. You can tackle any question related to supply chain, governance and coordination. And also with those articles that we've gone through, I'm certain that you can pretty well address any issue related to the topic. So, and of course, just to recap a little bit, we know that the business environment or agribusiness environment is really uncertain, very dynamic, and there are so many uncertainties, changes that take place in either way, either sides, both the supply side and the demand side. And because of these uncertainties, there's need for some coordination. As a supplier, as a buyer, and other actors, they need to coordinate these activities so that they are able to manage or overcome these risks and uncertainties. So at the end of the day, if they are able to manage all these changes that takes place, then they will have an improved supply chain performance. And last time we looked at some of the indicators of supply chain performance. So maybe who can remind us, when we talk about supply chain performance, what is it that we are interested in? Any reminder? How can you measure supply chain performance? Geoffrey?
Yes, doctor.
How do you measure supply chain performance?
I think from our opinion, how we measure supply chain performance is in terms of the efficiency of how there is a free flow of goods and services along the chain, and also looking at that coordination between the supply chain actors and then the supporters.
Yes, you're right. In terms of the efficiency, how are you managing the costs as these products move along the chain, or as you undertake the activities? And then effectiveness, are consumers getting these products at the right time and in the right form? Or are there misses maybe encountered here and there? So you must understand the supply chain performance. So coordination eventually will lead to an improved supply chain performance. So today I want us to move to the next lesson, which is on cross-border trade. So this is something that we are familiar with, and maybe some of us are have been involved in such kind of activities. So what can you see in that photo?
Doctor?
Yes.
I do see a very big lorry. I think it is the transit of the goods. And I also see movement of people to the opposite direction. So that's what I'm seeing, and also a road.
So you can see a lorry probably carrying some goods. And
yes.
The place is a bit dense, densely populated. You can see movements in and out. The traffic is flowing in both ways.
It could,
Yes.
Also, it
could
is
be across.
showing DRC is that way. There is a DRC sign. The Democratic Republic.
Democratic Republic of Congo. And there is a
Border crossing. That's all.
So what do you think? What is taking place here?
Doctor, there is trans-border trade taking place.
Yes, there is some cross-border trade taking place, but you can see people are just crossing, to the other side, of
yes.
the country. So it's like the border is really porous,
Yes.
And you can move in and out. And sometimes when I look at this picture, I, equate it to the, the Busia-Uganda border.
Yes.
I'm sure you guys, the Ugandans, are familiar with that border.
Yes, doctor. Yes, doctor.
Where I know Kenyans cross over to take beer, from Uganda, because the beer there is cheap. And even right now, by the way, I'm told that there are people who fuel in Uganda,
Exactly.
Because the fuel prices are pretty high here in Kenya. So what they do, they cross over, they fill their tanks, and then again cross back to Kenya.
That's very true.
Yes, so you can see that such kind of trade is actually a source of livelihood to many people, especially these small-scale traders who dash in and out of the two countries. So what is cross-border trade? What is cross-border trade? So we can say that it's about buying and selling of goods and services between businesses in neighboring countries, with the seller being in one country and the buyer is located in another country. But then as they engage in these transactions, the borders must be within a certain reach of duty, or must be defined. There is a defined area, clearly defined area where this trade must take place. So it must be within a reach of some specified kilometers. And this is normally specified by law. And I wonder whether these laws are really in place and whether they are really enforced, based on what I see, along the Kenya-Uganda borders or Kenya-Tanzania borders. So as people engage in trade, of course, this can be formal or informal in nature. So what is the difference between a formal trade or a formal cross-border trade and informal cross-border trade? Who can tell us?
Doctor, can I try?
Yes, you can try.
Formal trade, I think this is type of trade that it involves some sort of legal arrangements, maybe like contractual arrangements. But when it comes to informal kind of trade, this is trade that is not bound by maybe rules or contractual arrangements, where people just exchange, maybe like, for example, spot markets, people exchange from there and then, and it's done. That's my opinion.
Yes, so you are right. For the formal trade, it involves, traders that have been legally registered, and they fulfill all the legal requirements that are desired by that trading countries. But for informal ones, the traders or the parties who are involved are unrecognized. They do not have any legal registration. They are not legally registered. So they are doing it informally. They are unrecognized. It is kind of illegal. And many a times we find that between these two, which one dominates in many countries, the formal and the informal? Do you think that most of the traders who operate along these border lines are normally registered? Do they meet all the requirements that are needed for them to engage in those transactions?
Doctor, for the case of Uganda, for example, between Uganda and Congo, most of the trade that takes place is between informal parties.
It's between?
Informal parties.
Informal parties, eh? So they are the majority, eh?
They are the majority.
What about the others? I know there is cross-border trade, between Zimbabwe and South Africa, between Tanzania and Kenya, Uganda and Kenya.
Then Southern Sudan and Uganda.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, Southern Sudan and Uganda. Yes.
I have a question. Okay, so when we are talking about cross-border, they necessarily have to be bordering each other. Like you can say the trade between Kenya and South Africa is cross-border.
We are talking of neighboring countries, eh? These are businesses that are transacted, between neighboring countries, eh?
Okay, and the trade between, okay, like I'm saying, the AEAC, where we have trade between Kenya and Rwanda, but they're not necessarily like having the same border. They're not sharing any border. Is that still cross-border?
There is a reach. Eh? Normally, there's an international kind of law that defines the area of reach. So if and this is in terms of kilometers, eh? It's only that I'm not sure of the current kilometers for it to be, equated as a trans-border, trade. Eh? But there is a defined area of reach, such that I think we should check if Kenya and Rwanda, if they engage in trade, is a cross-border trade, eh? If it is within that reach.
Doctor, another two countries would be South Africa and Namibia.
South Africa and Namibia, eh?
Doctor, I have a question. When it comes to the cross-border trade, I know that there's borders and it requires passports, but from the picture you saw earlier, does it involve all countries that it doesn't require passports? And because, okay, for instance, between Swaziland and South Africa, there's like a border there, and of course there is legal movement between the countries. However, when you're trading, does it include the illegality of coming into the other country?
So we find that majority of those who actually trade at the borders, they actually do it illegally because they have not met the requirements. Ideally, you must have a passport. They must have the right requirements for them to be able to engage in any trade activity. But of course, we understand how those countries' borders, what goes on, corruption, and you just need to give those officers some small money and you'll be allowed to cross to the other country. Eh? And if they know that it is wrong, you do not have the right requirements or documentation for you to engage in such kind of activity. But at the end of the day, it's about, again, self-interest. Eh? So that is why you find that most of those traders who are involved in the cross-border trade are informal in nature. They are unrecognized by the government. Eh? So they are doing it illegally.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And yet the government is aware that such kind of illegal activities exist. Eh?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, they also have an interest. Eh? So there is a defined area within a reach in terms of kilometers. And this is normally specified by law. So I don't know between South Africa and Zimbabwe, whether it is specified South Africa and Namibia, Kenya, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. But if the country is further away, then that ceases to be cross-border. So why do you think countries engage in cross-border trade?
Doctors, because not all of us are, or not all of the countries are able to, for example, produce specific commodities due to a variety of reasons. It might be due to our weather conditions. Some countries are drier, others are wetter. So, for example, certain crops we cannot grow here because we might not have as much arable land as, for example, some of the neighboring countries might have. So it's also due to trade agreements as well that people engage in planting specific crops in order to trade, in order to access new markets, and in order to break out of their domestic market into other global markets, obviously capitalize on global participation.
Yes, you're right. Sometimes as a country, you cannot, produce everything, because of the weather conditions. So there are certain things that you need to, buy from your neighboring country. And there are certain things that they also buy from your country. So that exchange is very healthy in a case whereby we have got different climatic conditions and you plant at different times. So you find that when you're out, you've run out of some products, then you can easily fetch them from the neighboring country. Because in this case, if we think about countries that far away, you may end up incurring costs. But if, for instance, let me give you a good example, Kenya, where we buy eggs from Uganda. Sometimes we get maize also from Uganda. I know like fruits such as pineapples, watermelons, we buy them from Uganda because they have an ideal, climatic conditions for those products. And Uganda also, there are certain things that they buy from us. What do you buy from us, Sam?
I think there, is it milk?
Yes.
Import more milk?
Yes.
Hello.
I'm not getting you.
Milk. There, a form of milk.
What do you buy from Kenya?
He says milk, doctor.
Pork.
Milk.
Milk, dairy.
Oh, milk, eh? Oh, yes. Something funny, you buy milk from us, you process it and you sell it again back to us, eh? So that is quite interesting, eh?
Doctor, it's value creation and addition. It's what we learned in our first class.
So they buy milk from us, then they process this milk, they repackage it, and then they sell it to us again, eh?
Yeah, that's very true, doctor. Then sometimes we have beverage companies, especially juice. They like sourcing, they like buying oranges from Kenya because Kenya usually has those improved kind of oranges that some of the industries, when you look at their machine, they easily crush the oranges from Kenya.
Yes. So, and I think we've done it smoothly. All along, we've had a very smooth engagement as we trade as neighboring countries. Eh? So what else? Why would countries engage in cross-border trade? Alice, you're saying that some tomatoes, eh? Are they from Kenya, the ones that are believed to have long shelf life? Alice, could you share with us?
Yes, Prof. There are some tomatoes. Actually, normally there are trucks of tomatoes that normally come from Kenya to Uganda. And even on the market, when you check them out, they're more expensive than the ones that are produced in Uganda. In Ugandan market, like people prefer them, even traders prefer them. They say, I think there's something to do with either shelf life. I'm not really sure, but I'm aware that there are some tomatoes that come from Kenya. And people even on the market prefer them to the Ugandan tomato.
No,
Maybe
that is good, eh?
someone that has more information could help me clarify on that.
I didn't know that you also get tomatoes from us, eh?
We do.
I'm not aware, other than, you know, the milk and of course some of the fruits, eh? Yes, what else? Why do you think countries engage in this cross-border trade?
Also, Doctor, can we say, okay, for trade liberalization in the sense that, like some of these, if there was no cross-border trade, the tariffs and the quotas are very expensive. So with the cross-border, countries are able to like increase the volume of trade between the countries, reduce the cost of good like for the consumers and business now that the tariffs will be reduced, and also like create jobs and boost the economic growth across the both countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the agreements that have been established, these trade agreements have easen, you know, the process of even engaging in trade with the neighboring countries. So traders can now transact without incurring much cost, with ease, without really getting, you know, going through a tedious process of getting permits and so on and so forth. So this has really encouraged people to engage in cross-border trade. Mm-hmm. Other than the tariffs? Yes, yes.
No, please, maybe, Doctor, please carry on. I was almost coming in to mention another point, but you're still explaining tariffs.
Oh, okay. What about employment? Do you think there are people who cross to the other countries because of employment?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor. Very many.
Like in Kenya, we have a lot of Ugandans that are working, also Tanzanians.
Yes.
Even us
By
Ugandans have many Kenyans.
Even Ugandans, you have Kenyans, eh?
Yes, they've even taken residence.
So it's
Even some own land.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I know of Ugandans, a number of them actually, where I come from, my village is not far away from Busia, eh? And the majority of those guys who are employed, you know, to take care of the homes are Ugandans, eh? And especially from a particular, you know, community, the Padolas, eh? Because the Padolas, they can speak my local language, the Luo. When they speak, we understand one another. So there are quite a number in Kenya, and I'm surprised that our Kenyans are also in Uganda. So because of unemployment, they can move freely across the borders seeking for employment. What else? High inflation. Don't you think inflation? I just told you that because of the high, you know, prices of fuel, Kenyans are now crossing to Uganda to fuel their cars. Eh?
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Then another thing, Doctor, I think this cross-border trade, I really do believe it is ensuring food security, because you realize that some countries are blessed. They are very good food baskets, in the sense that if the other country suffers maybe a shortage, that kind of trade can try to harmonize that kind of balance.
Yes, food security. You're right. We have countries that are well endowed, the resources, the climatic condition is really favorable to undertake agricultural production. So they normally have food in plenty, in abundance. So instead of the food, you know, going to waste, why can't they engage in these neighboring countries, you know, trade with the neighboring countries that lack those essentials? Hanko, can you tell us about the cross-border trade between Zimbabwe and South Africa?
Doctor, I'm not well versed on that trade, but I know most of our fresh produce, some of them go out to those markets. And I know we sometimes exchange for oil and so on. But other than that, I'm not very well versed on our cross-border trade. Maybe Bongi or Kate might also be able to share some of the experiences with us if they know something
Bongile.
about the trader.
Bongile?
Yes, Doctor.
I know because of the SADC, the South Africa Development Community, you freely trade with the Zimbabweans and which country? Malawians are also part of it?
I know of Zimbabwe.
Are they members of the SADC?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Malawi, but I know it's Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, and Lesotho, and Mozambique.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
So how is the trade between these countries and South Africa?
So South Africa is like the main exporter. I mean, yeah, exporter to these countries because of course it's big and it imports. Well, South Africa imports a lot from like global markets, but it does have a few relationships, not a few relationships, but like minimal relationships with all the neighboring countries, like Swaziland and okay,
yes, so
I'm in the library, so I can't really speak properly.
Hello, just amplify your voice a little bit.
So I'm saying I'm in the library, so I can't really speak.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
You're in the library, yeah?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. So again, we realize that there are existing markets in the other regions that have not been explored. And when these markets are explored, they can also contribute to the development of those countries. So, and it is important that those markets be explored. So, what are the objectives of cross-border, trade? So, those are some of the objectives. Countries want to penetrate the foreign markets when maybe they are demanding for quality products and that can be delivered on time, and also that have the cost, implications addressed, less costly, then they are able to engage in cross-border trade. I know sometimes you find that production costs in different countries vary. For instance, in Kenya, it's very costly to produce maize because of the cost of fertilizer, but I think the government is now trying to subsidize fertilizer. But then you find that at the end of the day, the cost of production is quite high. And yet in our neighboring countries, cost of production is low. So when the goods even get to the local market, their prices are totally different from the local prices. So sometimes that one can push people to engage in those cross-border trades. Speed, effectiveness, and flexibility must also be observed. Again, a local supplier development. So how can these local suppliers be developed in the sense that whatever supplies they have are marketed at the right time without, missing some markets. So, and again, the local content requirements. Sometimes people or countries have different requirements. So these must be, again, looked into. Strategic focus and outsourcing non-core functions. You may have some functions which are not really that important. They are maybe demanded once in a while. So instead of having these functions in place, you can decide to outsource them once in a while when there is a need for these functions. So you can outsource them from the neighboring countries. And this is similar to the next point on access to expertise or technology. So maybe there is an individual who is an expert in a certain area, And instead of, engaging somebody or getting somebody from far, you can engage the person once in a while when you need his or her services. So long-term security. And we talked over food security and other security as well. So the customers' requests, sometimes they need to meet the demands or the requests of these customers. So globalization, again, is a key driver of cross-border trade. And we know that there are differences in production seasons, just as Hanko had mentioned earlier on. So, and the differences in production cost advantages. So that is why you find that people prefer to import certain products. For instance, I gave you a good example of eggs. The eggs that we get from Uganda is much cheaper than the ones that are produced locally, because the cost of feeds in Kenya is really high. So this has to be factored in the price. So you find that when we import eggs from Uganda, I don't know whether the cost of production is low in Uganda. Ugandans, can you tell us? How is the cost of, production in Uganda? Why is it that when your eggs land in Kenya, they are much cheaper than our local eggs? Alice? Mercy?
Doctor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On average, the cost of production of eggs in Uganda is not high because feeds are really accessible, and majority of these farmers who invest in poultry are able farmers. And then even when it comes to the local breeds, most of these people that do it easily access the feeds or the inputs due to the variety of crops of produce that are normally grown.
Yeah, and that is why it is cheaper to buy eggs from Uganda than our local eggs, because the cost of production here in Kenya is pretty high. Then we have the trade policy liberalization. We have the East African, commerce. We have the SADC. We have the ECOWAS, and so on and so forth. So these trade, policy liberalizations have really opened up to these markets, and we find that now countries can trade freely without lots of bureaucracies. Then the multilateral and regional free trade agreements that I've also mentioned again, these trade agreements have eaten up these spaces, and people can now move freely. And it was my first time, the other day to travel to South Africa without a visa. And I really felt nice, because previously you had to go through some tedious process, explaining why you want to travel to South Africa. But now that we have an agreement between Kenya and South Africa, as long as I'm not going to take more than a month, I can just, fly in and out. Don't you think that is nice? And when they open their borders, it means that even transactions, people are now able to transact. And that can also, of course, contribute to development. What do you think? Hanko?
Hi, Doctor. Yeah, it makes ease of movement in and out of the country very easy, which obviously is quite nice because people will then be encouraged to actually do business with us because they don't have to jump through the additional hoops of getting visas to come here. It's quite easy to arrange meetings and yeah, actually go through and engage in these kinds of agreements with companies in the various countries. It's really quite nice.
Yeah, because it was the first time that I boarded a KQ, flight that was almost full. The other times you could find that it's halfway, sometimes even 20 people. But this time round, it was almost full. And I think it's because of that, flexing a little bit on the visa, such that if you are coming to stay in South Africa for less than a month, you don't need to get a visa. Your passport is enough. So that enables people now to move in and out. And when they fly in, of course, at the end of the day, as they leave, they do some shoppings, they transact, and that contributes to economic development.
And it's also a reduction of barrier to entry, Doctor.
Yes. Reduction of barriers to entry. So we also have the technological innovations. So with the technological advancement, we are now able to transact, make payments, and do a number of things through the various platforms. So that, again, is another driver of cross-border trade. The transportation and ICT. Right now, we have a railway line that, I think soon will be able to go to Uganda and even to Rwanda. So with such kind of infrastructure in place, then it eases even transportation of these goods. Increasing competition at the home market. Sometimes we find that the home market is saturated. There's a lot of competition. And you want to now explore other markets that are less, where competition is not that tight. And that's why we find that some people, move to the nearby countries and establish businesses in those countries because they're trying to avoid the intense competition at their homelands. So the pressures for low cost and high quality agricultural inputs and products, I think that one is clear. Natural calamities such as drought and floods. This will push us, whether we like it or not, to engage in cross-border trade. Sometimes you find that there's a drought in a neighboring country or flood, and they're not able to, produce crops and undertake other activities. Political instability that hampers agricultural production. So again, we've seen how countries have gone through some political, challenges or instability. You remember the Sudan case, I know even at some point Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, these people do not have that environment to even undertake agricultural production. So it forces them now to trade with the neighboring countries. So at this point, clear?
Yes, Doctor, it makes sense.
We have high population growth. So you find that Kenya, we are really populated, and as even youths, you're not able to get employment opportunities. So you decide, let me move to maybe another country that is less populated, Rwanda or any other country. Changes in consumer needs and preferences. So consumers will be demanding for certain products that as a country you do not have. So again, it forces you to get these products from neighboring countries. Let me give you an example of rice. Rice from Tanzania is very, very nice. And most of the Kenyans love rice. So for us to be able to meet that demand, get the quality rice that they desire, because our local rice, the ones produced, in Ahero, and maybe we have others from where, cannot reach that standard. So we get a lot of rice again from Tanzania. The nations' relations, how do these different nations relate? Is there a harmonious relationship between the countries? And that can encourage trade. Who can give us an example on that? Who can give us an example of nations' relations? Are you aware of any countries that maybe due to the harmonious relationship, it has encouraged cross-border trade?
Doctor, I don't know if this one's correct, but I know that South Africa and Namibia, in terms of the currencies, we've signed an agreement that 1 rand is equal to 1 Namibian dollar, and you are rands in Namibia. And I do feel that that has always allowed for more trade to happen between Namibia and South Africa. I don't know if that's the example you're looking for.
So Namibia and South Africa, you have got a good relationship, eh? The two countries, the leaders, you know, they are in good terms, and that has encouraged trade between those two countries, eh? So again, we have got different taxation levels, eh? You find that in other countries, the tax is quite low. And I gave you an example, for instance, beer. You go to Uganda, the level of tax is a bit low on beer. And Kenya, it's highly taxed. So at the end of the day, if you buy beer from Kenya, it is very costly compared to Uganda. And that's why I told you that over the weekends, those who live along the borders, the Kenyans go to Uganda to drink in the evening, and then they cross back when they are done. And this is because of the taxes. Yes, Sibongile, can you talk to us? Sibongile, I can see there's something you've posted. So you talk of population growth, political instabilities, I think those are repeated, increased demand for goods and services. Sometimes there is high demand for goods and services, and you're not able to meet the demand. So it forces you to import or, you know, buy these goods and services from the neighboring countries to be able to fill the gap. And then shortages of certain commodities within the country. Good. So I think is that okay?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
So I think these are some of the incentives, you know, of engaging in cross-border trade. Reduction of, you know, risk of conflict. You know, when you are engaged in some kind of harmonious relationship, you are in good terms, then this even lowers the risks of conflict, because you are like brothers and sisters. So why will you start, you know, arming each other? And yet you are brothers and sisters. So that is how such kind of situation is perceived, and that minimizes on conflict. So this borders turns into the conduits for trade rather than barriers. So you look at it as an opportunity to engage in trade rather than a barrier. Again, we've talked about a comparative advantage, and whereby an individual has got the ability to carry out a particular economic activity and efficiently compared to others. So in such a case, you are able to engage in cross-border trade. So increased employment opportunities in some countries, free movement of capital also encourage cross-border investment. You find that a doctor works in South Africa or, you know, goes to Tanzania, or a Kenyan doctor is in Uganda, and so on and so forth. So again, it encourages free movement. You know, that one I've mentioned. Improve access to credit for individuals, SMEs, and even large companies. So how do you think cross-border trade improves access to credit? How does it enhance access to credit for individuals and other traders?
Well, Doctor, if a smallholder, for example, or at least if a specific set of smallholder farmers is able to access credit, they're able to produce the specific crops, which they will then be able to trade cross-border. So access to credit opens up a lot of trade opportunities. And obviously, if once you are able to engage in those trade opportunities, you're able to build relationships. So therefore, there'll be more trust between the two countries, or specifically even more between the parties who are obviously trading with one another. And obviously, this is where relationships become evident, as well as kind of like you're building consumer preference because you provided them with good quality products before. They will be more likely to come to you to get the good quality products that they got in previous years than then changing to go to another supplier if you are loyal, trustworthy, and honest in your business dealings. So in that sense, I would say access to credit would really help in that sense.
Yes, and if you have a market, a ready market for your products, you will be motivated to even produce more to meet the demands of that market. And as you increase in production, it means that you will get, you'll access some credit to enable you enhance your production. So, and you're able to meet the demands of the other market and even to participate in those markets. And when somebody knows that you are, engaged in some cross-border trade, there's also that trust, that you win their trust at the end of the day. So you are able to even have access to credit. Then we have the regional economic cooperation that promotes stronger political cooperation. So I think countries normally engage in this cooperation. I remember there's a time that there was some conflict between Kenya and Uganda. And the conflict was on the ownership of, Lake Victoria. So the Kenyans were claiming that there's a portion whereby that belong to them, and therefore the fishers from Uganda should not, go beyond a certain boundary. And Ugandans also claim that, fish from that particular area, it belongs to them. So there was kind of some conflict, but later on, I think it was ironed out when the two leaders met and they struck a deal. Ugandans, do you know that story?
Yeah, the Mijira Island.
The Migingo Island,
Yes,
so I don't know
Doctor.
whether they managed to demarcate the lake or what happened. Yes, yes. Mercy, you wanted to talk, or was Alice?
Doctor, I'm not really sure of how the agreement was between Kenya and Uganda, but what I remember is that they met. And when they met, I'm not really sure of the resolution that came up, but that conflict really, it was ironed out just as you said. So I'm not really sure of what the resolution was, but it was resolved. And I think, I don't know whether they both share now that part of Lake Victoria or not. But yes, but it had come really quite bad on both our sides.
And people are even killing each other,
Yeah.
Yes, because of that. But after meeting and ironing out the issues and establishing some, cooperation, then things cooled down. Again, it encourages economies of scale. So if you know that you have got a wider market, reach, then you are able even to increase your production scale. Then we've talked about crime prevention. Again, if these borders are opened, we find that the crime will be minimal. But if there are very strict measures, that is when now people devise different methods and ways of, penetrating into the other countries. And that's when you encounter such kind of crimes. Again, efficiency through competition. So even as people engage in competition, they engage in a very healthy competition. Any question up to that point?
No, Doctor.
Now, I want you to think about the COVID-19 season.
Excuse me, Doctor.
Yes.
I just had an inquiry. There is a scenario that that happens in Uganda. I don't know whether it's also under the other point of accessing credit. So there is one of our leading entrepreneurs in Uganda that got a loan, was able to get some huge loan from a South African-based credit. I think it's a credit company. So I don't know how, is that also part of like being that the borders are open, so you're able to access maybe cross-border credit facilities, or that could be a different point?
No, that is also similar to the other one, access to credit. You know, when the people engage in these cross-border transactions,
Doctor, just in line to what Alice is talking about.
Yes.
That the investor wanted some quite a huge amount of money that no bank could provide from Uganda, no local bank could provide. So he opted for a Kenyan bank to give him that loan. So it's only the Kenyan bank that could raise that.
So did he get the money from the Kenyan bank?
Yes, he got the money from the Kenyan bank, but there are some illegalities. They said that the Kenyan bank didn't have rights to operate in Uganda. Okay, to lend to Uganda. So he's trying to.
I think that was based on the history that they've had.
So the case in court is the businessman is failing to pay back the loan because of that illegality, that you don't have the right documentation to lend to.
Did the guy have the right documentation
to access the loan?
Because if, for instance, the guy has been banking with us and there is a track record in terms of the transactions, then that could inform the bank to loan to the guy. But you cannot just loan to somebody if you don't have some history about the company or the organization, if they don't have the right requirements.
You said, Doctor,
there were other interests behind it.
Doctor, what happens sometimes? Like these businessmen, they use all the tricks they can to get this money, these loans from the whatever companies that give loans. Then when they fail to pay, of course they are being sued and all that. So now they bring in, they try to twist the law, and they start saying, like, for example, this guy, the one that got money from this South African based, was saying these South Africans didn't have the right to operate in Uganda, all those things. But my question was always, how come he acquired the money in the first place? Like, why didn't he first look at all these, all these legalities and all that? I think they always use it as just a trick. Maybe they failed to pay back the money, so they want to just go away with it.
Not unless the guys did not really perform the due diligence, confirm whether those people had the right requirements, whether they were genuine. Sometimes somebody can present even a forged documents, and we've seen cases whereby foreigners present forged documents, and they are even able to transact huge amounts of money. So it must be on the laxity again of the bank attendants, because they need to really conduct customer due diligence to ascertain that the people that they are dealing with are, authentic, and they are mandated to engage in those transactions. Is that clear, Alice?
Yes, doctor.
So we have such foreigners that, have ill intentions, and they will find a way of getting what they want. So now I want you to think about the cross-border trade during COVID-19 pandemic season. So this is just an example of what happened around that time. So if you look at some of the the things that people were forced to do or observe, and how this pandemic really impacted on the cross-border trade. So you can pick out some of the issues from the write-up on the screen. Are you seeing the write-up? Just read through, These are just but a few, Okay, have you gone through that slide?
Yes, doctor.
So those are some of the challenges that traders faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So can you confirm, the Ugandans, that those things happened?
Yeah, yes, doctor, they did.
So how did COVID-19 disrupt cross-border trade?
One, doctor, I think there was a delay in supply of particular goods. Now, when you look at fuel, now when you look at fuel and also other food commodities from Kenya, you realize that this serious inspections at the border stages, you see that there was a delay in terms of meeting the demand. So that delay to test the truck drivers, and also even do some ways, also do even the periodic health inspection depending on what they are bringing to the country. So there was delay in terms of bringing the commodities to reconcile with the demand in the country.
There was delay in delivering some of these goods as well as services.
Hello, Doctor.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. According to what happened, there was a rise in production costs, in the cost of the products due to the charges of testing and then the facilitation of the drivers for the days that they spent on borders waiting for the tests and results to be out. Yes.
So the rising costs, because these costs had to be passed to the consumers, and you find that these truck drivers were also meeting certain costs because they had to go through screening, testing, and all that, and also the delays, the time taken even to clear with all those tests. And you find that the cost was passed to the consumers, and that led to high cost of products. What else?
Doctor, I think there was closure of some businesses that, because there was time limits that maybe from this time to this time we should be near homes, curfews. So most of the business were affected that they couldn't operate 24 hours a day.
Closure of some businesses. So some businesses could not operate or continue with their daily activities because of COVID. So they had to close the businesses.
Also,
What
Doctor,
else?
you would find that maybe if we had a truck of maybe can we say onions? I mean, maybe oranges coming from Kenya, maybe thrice a week. It was reduced to about once a week. That implied that the supply was reduced on the market. Hence, of course, increasing the price, just as some had said. Yes.
So you find that the number of trips were reduced,
Yeah, they were reduced because of course the delays maybe at the border and also all those restrictions. So the trips had to be reduced.
Yes, and that means that even the onions that were available were few, and people could now, scramble for them, and that increased the prices. What about the case of South Africa and Zimbabwe and Botswana?
So,
What
Doctor,
happened around that time?
what happened during COVID in our instance, it did impact cross-border trade somewhat, but it wasn't necessarily mainly cross-border that was affected. So with trade restrictions being implemented under level 5 of lockdown, all of our ports were closed. We implemented a curfew where everyone had to be home by, I think it was 10 o'clock in the evening or 8 o'clock at some times. And then we couldn't get any of our goods because obviously most of the imports or some of the commodities that we import couldn't get in, especially raw materials. I know most companies who make candles and stuff couldn't get their wax in because it was literally on a container ship in Durban, but they weren't allowed to come into the country. And then with that, we also had an outbreak of obviously a lot of people lost jobs and they were dissatisfied with this whole process, that the food that we had available in some of the shops became more expensive because we couldn't get the processing or the inputs in to produce some of the other materials. And all of a sudden we had strikes, we had national shutdowns, we had trucks that were burnt, we had demonstrations that were happening. So there was quite a lot happening during COVID, that there was a looting situation of malls. Buildings were burnt down. Some of the universities were burnt down, or at least not the whole university, just some of the buildings as part of the demonstration. So we had our own challenges during COVID in the initial stages, obviously. And as the situation improved to South Africa, after we had towards the end actually gotten access to vaccines, we were able to obviously slowly do the whole vaccine rollout program and reduce the levels of lockdown, as well as do the whole reduction of curfews and stuff like that, and so on. And we started bringing in containers. They were obviously just decontaminated when they got here, as well, just for safety's sake. And then things started somewhat normalizing until we were back at stage 5 again, about 2-3 months after that situation.
Yeah, so I think from that experience, and what you have illustrated, we see how the cross-border activities were really, interfered with during that season of COVID-19 pandemic. And it's very clear that people really lost, even business men and women, they really lost a lot during that period. And sometimes with those demonstrations, nobody was willing even to open his or her shop, because it was risky to, open your shop as people demonstrate. Others, could go looting. People took advantage of such opportunities and looted shops and so on and so forth. People lost jobs, and that reduced their even purchasing power. And of course, raw materials, they could not access the raw materials on time, and therefore they were not able to produce the products. And that means that there were no products available, or very few products available on the shelves, and that increased the costs or the prices of those products, and so on and so forth. So this is just but one of the challenges, but there are some emerging issues that have also hampered with the cross-border, trade. So are there other issues that have arisen in the recent past which have maybe compromised the cross-border trade? Are there any? Other than COVID-19?
Doctor, there was, I think you might have had it between Uganda and Kenya. I remember when Kenya banned our maize, because we used to export maize to Kenya, but there was some sort of banning. But with that, I think there was, because from the government of Kenya, they said that our maize had high levels of aflatoxins. But when I was following that discussion, especially on TV shows, you realize that there was something that was beyond the aflatoxins. So I think sometimes some historical differences also have issues, especially also have issues that affect this cross-border kind of trade, because when you look at the maize, that because that maize was brought back to Uganda and it was resubjected to that kind of health inspection, to those lab tests to confirm what the labs from Kenya had, whether it was true that there were high levels of aflatoxins, which was very true, but it was kind of contradicting from the results that we got. So I think sometimes these maybe could be political differences that could also be a potential impact to this cross-border kind of arrangement of trade.
Maybe Kenya wanted to protect the local market. Sometimes we find that we produce a lot of maize, especially the Rift Valley region. And if we import maize, we find that the prices will be, destabilized, and farmers may end up getting, very low prices for their products. So sometimes when the government wants to stabilize, an economy, and also just create a market for the locals, they come up with such kind of measures. But I remember that case, and at some point, it brought some tension between the two countries.
That's very true. Ideally, it was very intense. I thought that actually generally trade was going to be cut off, but I believe the strength of the East African community, they had to sit down and see how to navigate through that.
Yes, and such kind of tensions are normally not good. And that time, people are really throwing missiles, social media, Ugandans and Kenyans, they were hitting at one another. So it goes even just beyond, just individuals. So I think there are lots of examples that we can narrate, especially some of the challenges that we faced as countries and how they've limited cross-border trade. Good. So can we take a 5 minutes break?
Yes, please, Doctor.
You can take 5 minutes break and have some grab tea or something, eh? Is that okay?
Okay, okay, Doctor.
You grab tea or you grab coffee, eh?
Water.
Water, eh?
Yes.
Yes, you can also grab water. Okay, are we back?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
I believe you've grabbed a cup of water or something. Good. So now let's move to non-tariff barriers. So, of course, countries must protect their goals, and they can do so by initiating some of these barriers. So what are the non-tariff barriers? What are the non-tariff barriers? So these are restrictions that countries use in order to protect their political, economic goals. So there are conditions or certain market requirements that makes importation or exportation of products difficult or costly. Because sometimes you realize that you have more than enough products, but still people import same products or similar products from outside. So that leaves the local players, at a risk because they don't have the market, or the market becomes very competitive. So as a government, they must have some of these trade restrictions that can at least regulate the activities. So governments have different regulations and policies that they have put in place. They could be import policy barriers that limits the amount of goods imported, or bars the countries from importing certain kind of products, so that they cushion the local players. We also have customs and administrative entry procedures. Sometimes they can come up with very strict procedures or laborious procedures, thorough checks to ensure that as you engage in importation or exportation, you meet these requirements. Then we will also have some technical barriers trade, and we've also seen the sanitary and the phytosanitary measures that have been put in place, such that at the end of the day, they ensure that the products that are traded with meet the standards and the right certifications. Then there are certain limitations like the licensing requirements, the quotas, the taxes. Sometimes they can decide to increase the charges on imports, such as border taxes, administrative fees, and other duties. And you know that we also have other procedural problems, such as corruption, which is really high, especially along the borders, discrimination, lengthy procedures. So these procedures are very, very important because they facilitate trade. They help countries to, score their goals or their ambitions at the end of the day. So are you aware of some of these restrictions, maybe within your countries? I remember the other day, the Kenyan government increased taxes on car importation. So right now, it is very costly to import a car compared to earlier on. So I don't know whether they want us to use the locally assembled cars, or maybe they are discouraging, you know, the use of these second-hand, you know, cars. So do you have some of these restrictions in your country?
Yes, doctor, that one is very true. When you look at Pampers, these Pampers for babies in Uganda, recently URA, our Uganda Revenue Authority, increased the tax on most of the Pampers that are imported in Uganda. So I think it was more or less to discourage some of those businesses. So, because I think there is a company in Uganda here that is trying to produce. So I think they're trying to promote the domestic production compared to importation.
So do you think these non-tariff barriers are impediments to, you know, trade, cross-border trades within Africa?
I think, yeah, that's a very serious one. Though it is very good, you know, sometimes we have to encourage growth of other domestic maybe industries in Uganda, but the way some of these non-tariff barriers are imposed, sometimes it's not really friendly. But I believe it also has a very a good impact on cross-border trade.
Yes, you find that sometimes people just dump products to other countries. They know that the products are really not in the right order, not good for use or for consumption, but then they want a place where they can dump their products. Let me give an example of China. If you look at some of the products that you know, we import from China, and the products that China maybe exports to these developed countries, sometimes you find that the quality is different. I remember there's a time I was in Europe and I went to buy, you know, some clothes, and then I normally check where it has been made. So I saw that from China, but then, you know, that negative perception that products from China are low quality. But then I was told that, you know, the China, they have products, different products for different markets. So if you go to US or, you know, Canada or Europe, you'll find that the products from China are really good. The quality is super good compared to what we get here in Africa. So it's like in Africa, they dump some of these products. So as a country, it is important that you come up with some of these, you know, tariff barriers, such as the anti-dumping, you know, measures to limit such kind of, you know, activities. So does it happen also in your countries?
Doctor, recently there was a poultry tariff that was introduced for South Africa in order to support the South African poultry industry from the dumping of North American and South American poultry into South Africa. And it's sort of backfired recently as well, because just after that tariff's been introduced, South Africa's been hit with a hectic a new strain of avian flu. And if the people that are visiting in South Africa, if they go into the shops now, you may see that there's no eggs and limited supply of chicken. And now the price of importing chicken has gone up. So chicken's going to become a very rare commodity until we can sort out this avian flu outbreak.
Yes, so they want to trade, you know, with the quality products, But I don't know, in South Africa, I normally find your chicken to be abnormally, you know, huge, The meats, they are really meaty and really big, Hanko, what happens?
Doctor, so look, many of our chickens here are bred specifically for that. So we've got broiler production, and they are very how can I say, they are pushed with feeding. so that they obviously gain a lot of weight within a very short period of time. Obviously, the animal nutritionists work out what's the correct ratio of whatever so that they are so healthy and so on. But they are really pushed in order to get them as heavy as possible, as quickly as possible. And also, doctor, we are just South African. Chicken is a vegetable, so it has to be big. So we can still say we eat healthily.
But it scares people like us, because you know, sometimes I feel that I'm really eating a lot of you know, chemicals, because if you pump in a lot of chemicals so that it can balloon very fast and, you know, be released to the markets, so it means that you're pumping a lot of chemicals, and how suitable is it for consumption?
So, doctor, the broiler companies that I know of don't necessarily give their chickens a lot of like hormone treatments and stuff for growth or any chemicals. It is purely just feed and genetic breeding to try and get them to a place where the broilers pick up a lot of weight relatively quickly.
Okay. What about Uganda? Do you have some of these non-tariff barriers?
Yes, doctor, that's ones we have them, especially when you look at the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Because recently our Ministry of Agriculture tried to upgrade, especially on these phytosanitation measures. You realize that we have had issues to deal with some pests that have never been Uganda, and also those pests happen to have an entry due to some of the varieties of the crop varieties that were being brought into the country. So some of these measures have been tightened to discourage some of the crop varieties, could be animal varieties that are being brought into the country, especially with agricultural kind of inputs.
So do you think these non-tariff barriers are important? Why introduce these NTBs? Are they really important?
Yes, doctor. They're important.
Why do you think they're important?
For example, on the sanitary and the phytosanitary measures, they serve to improve, to ensure the quality of the products.
Yes, so the quality of the product. So at the end of the day, you know, they safeguard the consumers are well taken care of in terms of the health, the safety of the food, and you know, even the security. So both our animals and our plants and human beings are well taken care of, and even the environment.
Then, doctor, I think when you look at, especially when I look at these examples of these barriers, these restrictions, when you look at them, I think they strengthen the institutional framework of a country, because when you look at it, is more of that entry and exits, especially in the country, because if countries have these kinds of stricter regulations, at least whatever comes into the country or what lives in the country, at least it is legitimate in nature. So I think they strengthen the institutional frameworks of the country.
Yes, you're right. And at the end of the day, it also safeguards the national security. You know, there are certain countries you cannot just walk in. You must think twice because of the kind of, you know, regulations that they have. So you must ensure that you operate within those requirements. But there are certain countries that people just walk in freely and they do what they want because they know that the laws there are not really tight. It's a little bit relaxed. What else? Why do you think the NTBs are important?
Doctor, I also think it's a source of revenue to the country.
Yes, it is. It is a source of revenue to the country because when you pay for these license requirements and other fees. And also when you're trying to meet these standards, the intellectual property rights and all that. So you must pay some money, and that is a revenue to the country. What else?
There's something I'm thinking. I don't know if it's right.
Yes.
Sometimes they're used as like a tool to fight other countries. I think for the case of Russia, it invaded Ukraine. Most of the countries turned down contracts where they had to buy, supply to those countries. I think in attempts to weaken its economy because of what it had done to invade Ukraine. So it's more of a tool used to bring someone in line in case they act contrary to.
So for political purposes, Hello?
Yes, doctor.
So when they want to score some of the political ambitions, they can introduce some of these barriers. What about the protecting the home industries and consumers?
Doctor, that one is a very good point. Protecting, because when you look at our national development plan for Plan 3 for Uganda, it is trying to promote agro-based industrialization, especially at small scale level. So you realize that the government has tried to promote small scale kind of industries. Now, when we have these kinds of barriers, I think it promotes growth, because when these barriers are in position, they will restrict importation of some products that will even outcompete some of the products that are being made by these small scale industries. I do believe in that. Then on the other thing, before I forget, when you look at these barriers, I think they try to improve on trade relationships between countries, because there are countries that may want to do procurement and logistics, but now they would want to look at countries that are very reliable, and to get to know how reliable a country can be maybe indicators of reliability. These are some of the regulations that some countries maybe could try to draw their eligibility or criteria for one to source maybe equipment from such a country.
So it's a positive thing, of course, to have these non-tariff barriers. As a country, you are well positioned even to, interact with other countries, enter into some contractual arrangements, and even into business with the others, because there is some kind of respect that you deserve at the end of the day. And people also believe in the quality of products and even the services that you offer. So then how can this be reduced through ICT? How can we reduce these non-tariff barriers through ICT? So there are different ways of reducing these non-tariff barriers, because again, they can be a limitation to cross-border trade. And we can have a one-stop border post or joint border post. Instead of, filing the paperwork, we can, go online, digitalize some of these transactions, accurate border agency information on the websites. When we avail the right information on the website, that again can ease the transactions, documents being standardized, single entry point, and electronic processing. So let's begin with the first one. What is a one-stop border post? One-stop border post. What is a one-stop border post or joint border posts?
Doctor, is that not, for example, when you cross the border, they stop all of their vehicles to check where you are going to or where you are going from, and if you have the paperwork to actually transport your goods where you claim to go.
So you find that normally there's a lot of time wasted at the borders, and especially if these borders are many, they are multiple, so you'll have to stop at each border for screening, for some checks, before you proceed with the journey. So by the time you are, completing the journey, you realize that you went through so many, points. But then why can't we just have a one checkpoint whereby everything is finished at that point, so that there is a single facility in which the checks can be done, they can undergo through those control measures and all that. And once you are done at that point, then you can now just move until you get to your destination without really being stopped at any given point. I know in Kenya, let me give you an example of Kenya, whereby we have traders, getting even some agricultural products from the farthest end of the country, and they are delivering it to the other end. And you find that as they move, these products, as they transport these products with their trucks, there are so many police posts, and they'll have to stop at every police post. And with the corruption that is really rampant here in Kenya, you find that at every stop, they have to part with some money. They give these guys, some money to allow them to pass through. And then they go again, certain miles, certain mile, again, they find those posts there. So they have again to part. So at the end of the day, when this product gets to the final destination, they have parted with so much money. And you remember, this will now be passed on to the consumers. So you find that the prices of goods go up because of these such kind of costs. So with the one border stop post is just one facility whereby these control checks are done, everything is done. And once you are done and you are certified, then you can now go without stopping at any other point. Is that clear?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
So they enable the people and the goods to be, screened just at one point,
But doctor, because when I look at sometimes with our local arrangements in Uganda, for example, especially, I think this habit of corruption sometimes can compromise this one-stop border post. Yes, we do really believe that having many border posts, there is a lot of delays and other drudgeries involved. But I think with the level of corruption we have, I think it can compromise this one-stop border post, and then we have entry of certain things that are not illegitimate. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to think.
So do you think the one-stop border post encourages corruption, or it reduces corruption? Because remember, we are now eliminating the different facilities, or we are reducing the checkpoints such that you are only checked at one point. And once you've been checked at one point, then you can now freely move to the other border without again being checked at other points.
But
so,
doctor,
yes.
Remember, some people don't have, or some countries do not have access to those technologies. For example, maybe in case one is using one, if in case countries are using one-stop border, maybe if they are to check on one point, then this very point that has checked has to send a notice through all the stopovers to allow that truck go. But in instance, you find that most of our countries don't have those developed technologies. And the trust, how sure are you that the people that have checked or have examined these guys are really trustworthy. So it's a big system, a big chain that needs to be built and sensitized through, I think.
Of course, I agree with you. Let me give you an example of when I was, the other week when I was traveling from Stuttgart, Germany to Kenya, and I passed through Istanbul. So you know the way Germans, they really do their stuff, eh? When it comes to checks, it's serious checks. So, and when I got to Istanbul, when I was now connecting, there were no checks. And then I asked somebody, why is it that these guys are not really keen on the checks and I'm still transiting to another country? And then the person told me that, you know, when you are from Germany, they believe in those guys. They know the way those guys operate and how they do a thorough job. So they don't have to subject to again to other checks because they trust those guys and they know the kind of work they do. Because when I was traveling to Germany, I also passed through Istanbul, and there were serious checks before we proceeded to the other flight. So I was comparing when I was traveling to Germany and when I was going back. So it means that they were not trusting the checks that were done, you know, at the Kenyan borders. And when I was coming back, they trust the Germans because they know the nature of checks that they do. So, but if we can have a one-stop, you know, border that does a thorough check, and at the end of the day, people know the kind of work they do, then this can also minimize on the time lost at the different ports or borders or checkpoints. And people are in a position to move, you know, within the shortest time possible. Don't you think so?
Yes, Doctor.
So it will reduce on the time, and it will also reduce on the costs of delays at the border crossings. Because imagine going through the checks, the control checks, you will take a minimum of less than 1 hour. So if you take 1 hour or even 1 hour, 30 minutes, that's lost time. And you are to stop at even 3 checkpoints. So do you think this can work?
Yeah, Doctor, I now agree because you brought us several examples from different areas that you visited. I do believe now it works because if we have numerous kinds of these border posts, they are bound to so many kinds of compromises. But if we have one-stop border post, I think it really works to reduce these non-tariff barriers through ICT.
But then for it to work, there must be, of course, a legal institution framework. And also they need to harmonize some of these procedures across countries such that they are in unison, that whatever is being done there, the procedures are right. And of course, even the exchange of data. So they need to also avail the right information or data and this infrastructure that can support these kind of activity. So is that clear?
Yes, Doctor.
Then the other thing is filling paperwork online. So, you know, to avoid carrying papers, left, right, and center, and sometimes you end up even misplacing some of these documents. They can provide room whereby these people, traders, can fill some of the paperwork online. And then they are able to view the information from their end. Do you think that can also ease in the trade?
Yes, Doctor. That's very true because filing paperwork online saves a lot of time because first of all, if there are long queues, those long queues, sometimes they waste a lot of time. So people filing paperwork wherever they are before they do these kinds of trade, it is very, very important, because I've seen this, especially when it comes to our immigration in Uganda. Back then, getting passports, just first of all, passports, there were long queues by then, people bringing in those forms that they are filled. But now, since they have centralized the system, having that kind of integrated system whereby it has everyone's biodata, you only go to the immigration offices to just pick the passport, other than having the other long queues. Even when you look at these especially these, for us, these in Uganda, these URA wave bridges. Nowadays, you realize that you find that trucks, when they come, their information is already in the system. It's just a matter of mentioning the code of the truck and the code of the, and maybe the documentation code of the truck driver. So everything is reflected in on the system, and time is saved, especially when it comes to clearing at the border post. I think it works.
Yes, so that is important. Again, it can reduce the paperwork. It can also limit some of the time wasted at filling these papers. Then we have the accurate border agency information on the website. So again, the information should always be uploaded on website, the right information that can guide these traders. So if, for instance, you want to undertake a certain activity, or you can be able to access that information, you can be guided on the website on how to go about it. Then standardized documents. Again, as bordering countries, they need to come up with a standardized documents. Instead of having multiple documents, they can agree on the kind of documents that are demanded. Because sometimes you find that different countries demand different documents. So, but if it is standardized, then you are able to, you are familiar with this documentation. And even when it comes to filling these documents, you are familiar with them. Then a single entry point. So instead of having multiple entry points, you can have a single entry point. For instance, in Kenya, we know that if you are going to Uganda, you can either follow the Busia route or you can follow the Malaba route.
Yes, Doctor.
So to harmonize all these, and sometimes even to avoid some conflicting roles and information, there's need to have just a single entry point. Then electronic processing of some of these information and documents. That again can reduce the traffic and the jam as people wait to process some of the documentation. So I think this can help in reducing the tariff barriers at the end of the day. Okay, so can we continue? Are you okay? Are we together?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
So these are some of the cross-border trade disruptions. What is it that can disrupt these trades as people move these products, goods, and services? What are some of the disruptions? We have got the declining prices, and we know that the market sometimes can be really volatile and dynamic, and prices they keep on changing every now and then. Then the supply chain blockages. Sometimes as these products move through the different chains, again, you find that at the different chains, there could be some hitches here and there. The increased freight costs. Sometimes it's very costly even to transport some of these goods because of the freight costs. Again, depending on the value of the currencies. For instance, right now we know that our shilling has really weakened against the dollar, and it is really costly to even engage in some transactions. Export bans. There are cases whereby there have been bans on exportation of certain products, and that can disrupt cross-border trade. Have you had an experience of any export ban in recently? Within your countries?
Doctor, in terms of South Africa, the EU changed some of their regulations on citrus, which stopped any black spot fruit from being imported into the EU. So it stopped a lot of the citrus exports from South Africa to the EU, and this was really a very harmful thing to the citrus industry in South Africa as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so when you have such kind of ban, yes?
In Uganda, recently, I think in the month of August, yes, there was ban of exporting timber products from the East African country, because when you realize that these the timber they export, it leaves great destruction behind, deforestation and the likes, things that are really environmentally unfriendly. So there was a ban of export of timber from Uganda.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because people were now cutting down timber in order to export, eh?
Yes, doctor.
And that was now interfering with the environment, eh?
Yes.
Yes, so such kind of things can lead to disruptions of these cross-border trade. Then a slowdown in the demand. Sometimes you find that the demand for certain products really goes down. And therefore, if the demand is low, it means that that will also affect the supply. So all this, apart from others, of course, there are other things that can lead to disruption of cross-border trade, but these are just but a few to mention. Now let's look at the trade facilitation. So cross-border trade can, of course, be improved by engaging in trade facilitation. So, and this is whereby the trade partners, they cooperate, they kind of simplify the processes, standardize some of these processes, and harmonize the procedures, which are related to the information flows required to move these goods from one point to the other. And it goes just beyond that, in the sense that it also considers the way payment is made. So right now we know that with the advancement in technology, people can acquire information easily. Information can be availed in different forms, and payments can also be done in different forms. So you don't have to, walk to a bank to do a telegraphic transfer or, something of the sort. You can just sit and make, transact, from where you are. So, and the simplification and harmonization of international trade procedures, where we are referring to the activities, practices, and formalities involved in collecting, presenting, communicating, and processing data required for the movement of goods in international trade. So when you talk about trade facilitation, how do you facilitate trade so that it is done in a smooth way, in a flawless manner? So this demands for simplification of these procedures as countries, they need to simplify some of these procedures. As I mentioned to you that right now, we don't need a visa if you're a Kenyan traveling to South Africa, because they have decided to simplify that process. So as long as you have your passport, which is valid, then you can travel to South Africa. And sometimes they need to harmonize the international trade procedures. And that is why countries enter into some agreements so that they are able to harmonize these procedures and agree to them. Are we together?
Yes, doctor.
And it goes beyond that, because as countries, they should also be willing to share information. Whatever information they have collected, they need to avail it to the other parties, because that can also facilitate trade. So if I'm able to access details concerning a particular trader or person, then that can help you make some decision. So at the end, we can say that trade facilitation has been described as a set of policies, customs, techniques, and border masters that facilitate the movement of foods, and not just foods, goods, and even services. So all these policies that supports trade or can facilitate the movement of goods, the movement of services, even the movement of people, are referred to as trade facilitation. Is that clear?
Yes, doctor.
So can you give us an example? Can anyone give us an example whereby countries have simplified and harmonized some of the rules and procedures, other than the one that I've just mentioned, so that they can, enhance trade between the different countries? Anybody with an example? Anybody with an example?
Doctor, I was thinking now for a case of us East African countries, I think with the consolidation of the East African Federation, I think some of these they discuss some of these trade facilitation to harmonize ways how we countries within the East African community can do trade. So it might not be necessarily but East African community, but there are also other trade bodies, maybe for example COMESA and maybe SADC, because I think they have some kind of ways they coordinate trade amongst countries in specific regions.
So as they come up with those agreements, they are harmonizing some of the rules and the procedures, such that they are in agreement as countries that this is what we want, this is how we will operate, these are the requirements that we'll demand from the people as we engage in trade. Then also modernization of trade compliance systems. So again, they can decide to modernize these systems. They can come up with systems that can be used across the countries. And also when it comes to administration of and management of trade and customs procedures. Again, the way they are managed and administered must also be agreed upon, so that if for instance, you find that you go to another country, the way they are even conducting their operational activities, the way they are doing their checks is totally different from another country. This can be synchronized such that you expect that when you go to the Ugandan airport, you will perhaps go through the same procedures. When you go to Kenya, you expect kind of more or less the same procedures.
Yes, Doctor.
And then we also have the institutional mechanisms that safeguard the effective implementation of some of these trade facilitation principles. So there must be institutional frameworks in place that guides the implementation of these trade facilitation principles. But it is not an easy thing. Even trying to harmonize these rules and procedures to a point that you agree as nations that now this is how we will be operating, because different countries have got different interests and they perceive things differently. So I know some of those negotiations, they really take quite some time. Even those agreements, they take quite some time. So those are the trade facilitation principles that they've talked about. Transparency. Countries must be transparent. Even when it comes to information, they need to share the right information. And then the simplification. They need to simplify their procedures. Harmonization. How can they harmonize these diverse procedures and diverse thoughts, ideas, so that they are able to agree on a particular way of managing trade, and then standardization. So what is an ideal standardization of some of these products? Because again, if you find that they vary across, countries, if for instance, we are importing milk we are exporting milk to Uganda, is there a standard way of measuring the quality of milk? And is it the same as when we export to Tanzania and we export to Sudan? Do they have different standard measures? So all this must be synchronized. So those are the trade facilitation principles. So for trade to be facilitated in the right way, there's need for countries to be transparent, simplification of some of the procedures. They need to harmonize the ideas, the rules, the procedures, and then they also need to agree on standardization. Any question up to that point? Do you think these principles hold? Are they attainable?
Yes, Doctor.
They're attainable, but Doctor, when I look at these principles, given the nature of trade around countries, I think they need a lot of efforts from the enforcing bodies and government at large, because there is a lot that needs to be done to see that these principles are really attained, because I really see they need a lot of a good, strong kind of legal framework to enforce this.
Yes, so even as they are involved in coming up with the agreements, sometimes it is not easy to address these 4 principles. You may end up compromising on one. So agreeing on all these principles can be an uphill task. But at the end of the day, it is required that in whatever agreement they make, they need to be transparent, simplify the terms, harmonize some of the ideas, and come up with a standardized way of measure. So any question up to that? I wish to stop at this point because I don't want to move to the trade facilitation as a public good, because it will take us quite some time to understand all that. But at your own time, read about a public good. What is a public good? What are some of the characteristics of a public good? And again, this is something that you tackle in behavioral economics or new institutional economics. Is that true?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, so at your own time, figure out on what is public good. And then I also have a question for you.
Yes.
I have a question for you guys. So what is the future of cross-border trade in a digital world? What is the future of cross-border trade in a digital world?
I think, to my opinion,
that is something that you need to discuss.
Okay.
So that in the next meeting, we will begin with it.
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, so think about the future of cross-border trade in this era of digitalization.
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, so I think that is it, guys. So let's meet next week.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, I'll send you some articles related to this topic so that you can also go through the articles.
Thank you,
Remember,
Doctor.
there is some work that I shared with you at the beginning of the semester. You have an assignment that you should work on.
The term projects.
Yes. So just a polite reminder that don't forget about it, and wait for last minute.
Doctor, will you adjust the deadline for that work presentation?
For the project?
To adjust the deadline?
Because I believe it has to be in October, I think about 2 weeks from now, and you shall be writing a test, I think, within that same week.
And other tests too, upcoming.
When I checked my calendar, you communicated, I think, 25th October. That's when you are meant to submitting that work.
When is the next cut?
The next cut on 17, right?
Yeah, it's on the 17th.
17th, yes. Yeah, so
because we write agribusiness next week Tuesday, and then we write value chains on the 17th, and then I'm suspecting finance and risk is coming the week thereafter, somewhere either in the same week or the week thereafter. So yeah, if we could, it would be greatly appreciated.
So you want me to push the timeline for submitting the test, the assignment, the term paper?
Yes, please.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, then let's discuss next week. I'll check my calendar and communicate.
All right, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thanks. Have a good evening.
A good evening to you, Doctor.
Okay,
thank you,
bye.
Doctor. You too.